The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, the one she told herself every single morning. I am safe here. But safety wasn't the cool, rich soil she crumbled between her fingers, nor was it the gentle scent of chamomile clinging to her worn dress. It was a cage. A quiet, lonely cage she had built for herself and her son Leo, on the misty edge of the world. Whisperwood Edge. The name itself was a hush, a place for secrets and forgotten things. Like her. Her real goal, the one that beat like a frantic drum in her chest, was simply to remain invisible. Because of that, her days fell into a simple, quiet rhythm. Garden, tinctures, market, Leo. He was the sun her tiny world orbited, his laughter the only melody that mattered. He sat now in a patch of sunlight, his small hands carefully arranging a pack of crudely carved wooden wolves. His pack. A pack that would never know the sting of rejection, not if she could help it. Come morning, she'd take her remedies to the town square, a place that tolerated outcasts because their coin was still good. She would keep her eyes down, her voice low, and her interactions brief. More importantly, she'd make sure no one looked too closely at Leo, at his bright, curious eyes that were so much like his father's. Deep down, she knew the truth. This peace was fragile, a hawk's shadow passing over a field mouse. Mama? Leo's voice was small, pulling her from her thoughts. He held up the largest wooden wolf, its head tilted. Did my father have a wolf too? Her breath caught. The simple question was a stone tossed into the still pond of her carefully constructed peace, the ripples spreading out to touch shores she had long since abandoned. She tried to smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack. How could she explain it to him? How could she tell him that his father not only had a wolf, but that he had used its strength to shatter her heart before the entire pack? That he had declared her too old, too used, too damaged? Yes, sweet boy, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. He did. A very strong one. She didn't know what scared her more, the lie, or the fact that he would one day learn the truth. Before she could move, before she could gather him in her arms and chase the shadows from his eyes, he asked another question, a question that felt like a premonition. Is he a king, Mama? Like in the stories? In that moment, a cold weight settled in her chest, because she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that their fragile peace was about to end. The hawk was no longer just a shadow. It was circling. The market was a tapestry of noise and smells, baking bread, curing leather, and the damp, earthy scent of the ever-present mist. Nadia kept Leo's hand tucked firmly in hers, her head down as she navigated the small crowd. But then she saw them. A young couple, barely 20. He was tall and broad, his arms slung possessively around her shoulders, and she was laughing, her head thrown back, the mating mark on her neck a vibrant, fresh seal of belonging. They were everything she wasn't. Young, carefree, claimed. As if pulled by a string, the present faded, the colors bleeding out until all that remained was the stark, gray memory of her own ceremony. The memory hit her, not a gentle wave, but a battering ram. The scent of pine and ozone from the ceremonial bonfire, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, the hopeful, terrifying beat of her own heart. She had been 31. Older than most, but her fated mate, Gideon, had finally come for her. She had thought it was the start of her life. Instead, it was the end. What followed was the sharp, cruel sting of his words, each one a whip crack in the stunned silence. He stood before the pack, before the elders, and he looked right through her. She is too old, his voice boomed, laced with a smooth, practiced disgust. Her childbearing years are behind her. She is damaged goods. My wolf rejects her. Our pack deserves better. The world had tilted. The faces in the crowd blurred into a collage of pity and contempt. No one defended her. No one spoke up. Her worth, her entire existence had been weighed, measured and discarded in the span of a single breath. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, searing brand on her soul that had never faded. A tug on her hand brought her back. "Mama, are you okay?" Leo's wide, innocent eyes stared up at her, a mirror of the man who had shattered her. Panic built in her chest, thick and suffocating. She had to get out. She had to get him away from this place, from these people, from the ghosts that haunted her. "Yes, baby," she choked out, her voice tight. We're going home now." Without another word, she scooped him into her arms, ignoring the curious stares as she fled the market. She ran, not just from the memory, but from the chilling truth that deep down, a part of her still believed every single word Gideon had said. She ran for the sanctuary of the woods, for the only place she felt whole. But the woods were no longer safe. As she reached the tree line, a low, unfamiliar rumble vibrated through the soles of her worn boots. A sound of power. A sound of the world she had run from. It was the sound of it catching up. As if summoned, her head snapped up. The sound grew louder, a percussive beat of heavy hooves and rattling iron that was utterly alien to the quiet hum of Whisperwood Edge. It was a procession. No, a convoy. Black carriages, polished to a mirror sheen, were drawn by massive destriers, flanked by riders in silver and black armor. Royal colors. Her heart skipped. She grabbed Leo, pulling him deeper into the shadows of the forest, her body moving on instinct. She wanted no part of this. They were a force of nature she had no desire to weather. The townsfolk were gathering along the path, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Kings and their retinues didn't pass through forgotten border towns without reason, and the reasons were never good. War, taxes, trouble. She held her breath, praying they would simply pass by, a bad dream she could forget by morning. Her wolf, a creature she kept caged deep inside, stirred restlessly. "Danger," it whispered. "Danger is coming." She hushed it, forcing it down. They were safe here. They had to be.
Meanwhile, inside the lead carriage, a king was dying of boredom. King Theron stared out the armored window, the endless green of the forest a monotonous blur. His minister droned on about trade disputes and timber yields, the words washing over him like a tepid stream. He was a king forged in battle, a ruler who commanded legions, yet here he was, trapped in a gilded box, listening to a man whose greatest conflict was a misplaced comma in a tax ledger. The truth was, he hadn't felt anything real in years, not since the scent of winter roses and blood had stolen the color from his world. Now, there was only duty. A cold, heavy mantle he wore every single day. His wolf, a beast of immense power, slept within him, a slumbering volcano of grief and rage he dared not awaken. Because of that, his world was shades of gray. Logical, controlled, empty. This tour of the border territories was a political necessity, a show of strength and stability after whispers of unrest had reached the citadel. To him, it was a pointless exercise. These towns were distant specks on a map, filled with faces he would never see again. His gaze drifted from the window, and for a single, inexplicable second it snagged on something. A flicker of movement at the edge of the woods. A woman, pulling a small child into the shadows. Her face was turned away, but there was a fierce, protective energy in the line of her back that resonated with something ancient inside him, an instinct he thought long dead. Who was she? And why did the sight of her feel like the first drop of rain after a decade-long drought? Before the thought could fully form, the world exploded. Without warning, the carriage jolted, a sickening lurch of wood and metal. The minister's words cut off in a wet gurgle. Shouts erupted from outside, followed by the demonic shriek of steel on steel. The carriage rose, and then it flipped. Time stood still. Theron was thrown against the ceiling, which was now the floor, his head cracking against a gilded strut. Darkness bloomed at the edge of his vision, and in that single heartbeat as chaos roared around him, his only thought was of the woman at the edge of the forest. Her. Then the world shattered. and there was only pain and the roaring, furious awakening of the wolf inside.
The world was screaming. Metal tore, wood splintered, and the raw, guttural roars of wolves at war ripped through the misty air. Her first instinct was to run, to grab Leo and disappear so deep into the forest that no one could ever find them. But then, her blood ran cold. Through the chaos, a figure broke away from the main fight. An attacker, his face a mask of brutal determination, sword in hand, and he was heading straight for the tree line, straight for them. In that moment, she didn't know what scared her more, his weapon or the chilling realization that he wasn't just running, he was hunting for witnesses. Her body moved on instinct. There was no time for fear, no room for the broken woman who flinched at shadows. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted, and she was no longer Nadia, the outcast. She was a mother, a she-wolf protecting her cub, and she would die before she let him touch her son. "Leo, hide," she commanded, her voice a low, urgent whisper she didn't recognize. "Behind the great oak. Do not move. Do not make a sound. Do you understand me?" He nodded, his small face pale with terror, and scurried away. Without thinking, she darted in the opposite direction, making herself visible. A target. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice cracking. The attacker's head snapped towards her, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He changed course, lumbering after her. Good. She knew this part of the forest like the back of her own hand. Every root, every vine, every treacherous patch of mud. Because of that, she was faster, more agile. She led him on a frantic chase, deeper into the tangled undergrowth, his heavy footsteps crashing behind her. What followed was a desperate, panicked prayer that her plan would work. Just ahead was a game trail that crossed a shallow ravine, hidden by a thick carpet of fallen leaves, a place where she herself had twisted an ankle last spring. She leaped over it, landing hard on the other side. As she expected, he didn't see it. His triumphant roar turned into a cry of shocked pain as his leg plunged through the leafy debris, his ankle twisting with a sickening crack. He went down, his sword flying from his grasp. Before she could move, before she could even process what she'd done, she grabbed the heaviest, gnarliest fallen branch she could find, and she let it happen. She swung with all the force of her terror and her love, bringing it down on his head. The impact was a dull, wet thud. He slumped, unmoving. The silence roared in her ears, her chest heaving. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the raw, primal power that had surged through her. Her wolf pressed forward, tasting its first victory in years.
Pain was an old friend, a cold, familiar companion. But this was different. This was a symphony of agony conducted in his bones. He fought his way out of the splintered carriage, his royal guards forming a desperate, dying circle around him. Attackers swarmed them, fighting with a ferocity that spoke of high stakes and higher pay. Traitors. The word echoed in his skull. They knew his route, his guard detail. This was a serpent from his own court. A sword sliced through the air, aimed for his throat. He parried, the impact jarring his wounded arm, and drove his own blade through the man's chest. Another took his place. They were relentless. He was a king, an alpha of alphas, but he was bleeding, and his strength was fading. But then through the din of battle he saw her, the woman from the woods. He saw her lead one of the assassins away, a desperate, clever tactic. He watched her disappear into the trees, and for a moment he feared for her. What could a lone woman do against a trained killer? What he saw next stopped his breath. The killer went down, and she stood over him, a wild, elemental fury in her stance. Not a warrior, something more, a force of nature. In that moment, something inside him shifted. Awe. Pure, unadulterated awe. The distraction cost him. A searing pain erupted in his side as a blade slipped past his guard. He roared, a sound that was more beast than man, and gutted his attacker. But the damage was done. His vision swam, the edges turning gray. His legs buckled and he fell to his knees, the roar of battle fading to a dull hum. As the silence stretched, he saw her emerge from the trees, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at the carnage, at him, and then she ran. Not away. Towards him. Her scent hit him first. Chamomile, damp earth, and the clean, sharp smell of a she-wolf who had just protected her own. It was the most intoxicating thing he had ever smelled. The last thing he saw before the darkness closed in was her face, framed by a halo of forest green, her eyes filled with a terrifying and beautiful strength.
Her chest ached as she knelt beside him. He was a giant of a man, all muscle and authority even when bleeding out on the forest floor. The king, the Alpha King. And he was dying. Without a second thought, she tore a strip from her dress and pressed it hard against the gushing wound in his side. A low groan rumbled from his chest. "Hold on," she whispered. The words meant more for herself than for him. Just hold on. What followed was a blur of frantic effort. She managed to get him to his feet, his arms slung over her shoulders, his sheer weight nearly crushing her. She half dragged, half carried him through the woods, back to the one place she could help him. Her cottage, her sanctuary. She laid him on her simple cot, which groaned under his weight, and her healer's instincts took over. She washed the wound, her hands moving with a sureness that belied their trembling. She ground herbs into a poultice, yarrow to stop the bleeding, willow bark for the pain, and packed it into the gash. Moments later, as she worked, a small figure appeared in the doorway. Leo. He stood there, silent, clutching his wooden wolf, his eyes wide as they took in the wounded king on his mother's bed. Nadia's heart leaped into her throat. "It's okay, sweet boy," she said softly. "He's hurt. We're helping him." Theron's eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. He saw Leo, and for a second, his expression tightened, the defensive posture of a wounded predator. But then, Leo did something that changed everything. He walked forward, his small face etched with a child's pure empathy. He held out his toy. "For your wolf," Leo said, his voice a tiny whisper in the quiet room. "So he won't be lonely?" He looked at the massive, formidable king. "Are you Sir Wolf?" The air thickened. Theron stared at the small wooden carving, then at the boy. The hard lines of his face seemed to soften, the cold gray of his eyes warming with an emotion Nadia couldn't name. He didn't answer, a wave of pain making him grit his teeth. Before either could speak again, the sound of heavy, approaching hoofbeats shattered the quiet. The king's reinforcements. The world was at her door. And she had a feeling it was here to tear her life apart.
Consciousness returned in waves, each one bringing a fresh tide of pain. But beneath the pain was something else. Warmth. The scent of herbs, and the ghost of a child's voice calling him. Sir Wolf. He forced his eyes open. He was in a small, rustic cottage, the air thick with the smell of drying flowers and a crackling hearth. The woman, his woman, a voice in his head growled, was changing his dressing. Her touch was gentle, yet firm, efficient. The door burst open, and his general, Kale, stormed in, flanked by two of the royal guard. Their eyes swept the room, taking in the scene. Their king, wounded, being tended to by an unknown female in a peasant's cottage. "Your Majesty." Kale's voice was rough with relief and suspicion. He glared at Nadia. "Who is this?" "She saved my life," Theron said, his own voice a low rasp. He pushed himself up, ignoring the searing protest from his side. His goal was clear: assess, command, control. "The area is secure, Majesty," Kale reported. "The assassins have been dealt with. It was the Shadowclaw pack, from the borderlands, working with someone from the inside." Shadowclaw. The name rang a faint bell, but Theron's focus was elsewhere. He looked at Nadia, who had shrunk back, her hand protectively on her son's shoulder. They were witnesses, and the traitors who had arranged this ambush would not leave witnesses alive. "We are leaving," Kale declared, his gaze dismissing Nadia as irrelevant. "We'll be back at the Citadel by dawn." "No," Theron said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap. Cale froze. Majesty. Theron's gaze locked with Nadia's. He saw the terror in her eyes, the desperate plea to be left alone, to be forgotten again. He saw her pulling her son closer, a shield against the world he was about to drag her into, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that leaving her behind was not an option. It would be her death sentence. More than that. The thought of leaving her felt like tearing out a part of himself he had only just discovered. They are coming with us, he commanded. But sire, she is no one. A borderlander. Nadia flinched. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. We want no trouble. Just let us be. Her plea twisted something inside him. In that moment, he saw the depth of her fear, and it solidified his resolve. He would not be the next man to abandon her. He rose to his full height, ignoring the white-hot fire in his side. He stepped between his general and Nadia, a living wall of authority. She saved your king when his royal guard could not, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. From this moment on, she and the boy are under my personal protection. They will ride with me to the citadel. That is not a request, General, it is an order. Without another word, he turned to Nadia. The space between them burned with unspoken words, with the violent collision of their worlds. He saw her fight, her fear, her resignation. He saw the moment she understood there was no other choice. As if fate demanded it, she gave a small, defeated nod. She took Leo's hand, her knuckles white, and walked out of her home, leaving the door open to the life she was leaving behind forever.
The royal citadel of Stonefall wasn't a home. It was a tomb. A cold, beautiful tomb of polished gray stone that seemed to drink the sunlight and breathe out a chilling silence. Servants moved like ghosts in the long, echoing corridors, their eyes never quite meeting hers, yet she felt their stares like 1,000 tiny needles on her skin. They had been given a suite of rooms larger than her entire cottage, filled with silks and velvet and gilded furniture that felt alien to the touch. It was a cage no matter how pretty the bars. Leo, on the other hand, was enchanted. He traced the patterns on a thick tapestry with a chubby finger, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's a castle, Mama! A real castle!" Her goal in that moment was to build a bubble of warmth in the heart of this frigid fortress. She knelt beside him, forcing a smile. "It is, my love, a very big one." But her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against the bars of its cage. This world of power and politics was the very thing she had fled. And now, she was in its heart. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at the tall, arched window, looking out over the moonlit training grounds. The air tasted of cold stone and steel. Below, she saw a lone figure moving through a series of brutal, elegant forms with a long sword. The king. Theron. Even from this distance, she could feel the sorrow rolling off him, a palpable wave of grief so profound it made her own ache in sympathy. He wasn't just a king. He was a man haunted by ghosts far older than hers. As if he felt her gaze, he stopped, his head tilting up towards her window. The space between them crackled, her breath caught. Even from so far away, his stare felt like a physical touch, a brand of heat on her skin. Without another word, she stepped back from the window, her heart racing, her wolf stirring with an instinct she didn't dare name.
Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford. The ghosts of his past were always waiting for him there, their whispers louder in the dark. So instead, he trained. He drove his body to the point of exhaustion, the clean, sharp pain of the blade, a welcome distraction from the phantom ache in his soul. But tonight his focus was gone. It was shattered by the image of a woman with forest green eyes and the quiet strength of an ancient oak. Nadia, her scent, chamomile and wild courage, seemed to cling to the very air of his citadel. He looked up and there she was, a silhouette in a high window, bathed in moonlight. A fragile-looking thing, Yet he knew she possessed a core of tempered steel. He had seen it. He had felt it. In fact, he found himself captivated by her quiet dignity. In his court, women clawed for attention, for power, for status. They were polished jewels, hard and glittering. She, on the other hand, was a river stone, smooth, unassuming, yet shaped by a relentless current into something of unbreakable substance. She sought nothing from him. Her only concern was her son. This purity of purpose was a beacon in the murky, treacherous waters of his court. What's worse, it made him feel something. A dangerous, unfamiliar warmth that threatened to melt the ice around his heart. A king, especially one with as many enemies as he had, could not afford such warmth. It was a weakness, a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to look away. He wanted to know the story behind the shadows in her eyes, the reason a she-wolf as strong as her had been cast out into the wilderness. Before either could speak, though they were 100 yards apart, a guard approached, his footsteps echoing on the stones. "Your Majesty, a lady of the court requests an audience. Lady Seraphina." Theron's jaw tightened. Seraphina, ambitious, cunning, and the daughter of a powerful alpha whose loyalty was conditional. He gave one last look at the empty window where Nadia had been. The complexities of his world were already closing in on her, and he knew deep down that protecting her body would be far easier than protecting her heart from the vipers in his own den. The next morning, he summoned her to the strategy chamber. The room was dominated by a massive oak table carved with a map of the kingdom. It was a room of power, of war, of cold, hard facts. He wanted to see how she would react, to gauge the depth of her spirit away from the forest that was her strength. His general, Kale, stood by his side, his disapproval a tangible presence in the room. His immediate goal was simple: get a clear, unbiased account of the ambush. He'd had reports from his surviving guards, but their accounts were colored by panic and the shame of their failure. He needed fresh eyes. Nadia entered, her son holding her hand. She looked small and out of place against the stone and steel, yet she met his gaze directly. There was fear there, yes, but it was banked, controlled. "Leave the boy with the guards," Kyle grunted. "No," Theron said, his voice quiet but absolute. He gestured to a chair. "He stays. Sit." She did, settling Leo on her lap. Theron began the questioning, his voice formal, detached. "Tell me everything you saw. Start from the moment you heard the convoy." As she began to speak, something shifted. Her initial nervousness fell away, replaced by a sharp, focused clarity. She described the number of attackers, the way they moved, not like a disorganized pack, but with the coordinated precision of trained soldiers. She noted the black fletching on their arrows, a detail his own men had missed. Kale shifted, a flicker of surprise in his hardened eyes. "Their leader," Theron pressed, leaning forward. "What did you see?" "He wasn't a wolf of the forest," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "He moved like he was used to flat open ground. And his blade, it wasn't a pack blade. It was cavalry steel, the kind the border patrols use." Her eyes, when she looked at him, were startlingly intelligent. "They weren't trying to rob you, they were trying to execute you." The silence that followed was heavy. Kyle stared at her, his skepticism melting into grudging respect. She had seen more in a few terrified moments than his men had in the entire battle. Theron felt it again, that surge of awe. This woman's worth had nothing to do with her age or her rank. Her instincts, honed by a life of survival, were an asset more valuable than any political alliance.
She didn't know where the words came from. Maybe it was fate, or maybe for the first time in years someone was actually listening to her. She spoke the truth as she saw it, the details of the attack etched into her memory. The king, Theron, watched her, his golden eyes intense, analytical. He wasn't looking at her as a woman or as an outcast. He was looking at her as an equal. The feeling was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her son's life, her life, depended on this man believing her, on him seeing that she wasn't a liability. Just as the silence stretched, a guard entered, bowing low. "General, we've identified the insignia on the assassin's armor. It was faint, but we got a match." Cale took the offered parchment. His face paled. With every heartbeat, Nadia's anxiety grew. He looked from the parchment to her, and his expression was one of dawning horror. "What is it, Cale?" Theron demanded, his voice like rolling thunder. Cale finally looked at his king. "The assassins, my lord, they bore the mark of the Black Moon Pack." The name hit Nadia like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her world tilted. Black Moon. The pack that had chewed her up and spit her out. The pack that had shamed her, exiled her, and left her for dead. Gideon's pack. Her past wasn't just catching up to her. It was here at the gates with a sword in its hand and murder in its heart. The formal dinner was a special kind of torture. She sat at the long, polished table, a wild weed mistakenly planted in a manicured garden of poisonous flowers. The ladies of the court, dressed in shimmering silks and dripping with jewels, watched her with thinly veiled contempt. Their whispers followed her like wasps, stinging and persistent. "The border wench. Look at her dress. It's homespun. What does the king see in that relic?" Her goal was to be a stone, impassive, silent, unbreakable. To endure this for Leo's sake, and for the king who had offered them his protection. Theron sat at the head of the table, a mountain of contained power, but he was engaged in a tense conversation with a visiting alpha from the south. He couldn't protect her from this, no one could. A pompous, fleshy noble seated opposite her, Lord Valerius, had been staring at her all evening. She knew his name because he was a known ally of the Black Moon Pack, an ally of Gideon's. He finally spoke, his voice booming into a lull in the conversation, ensuring everyone could hear. "It is a curious time for the kingdom, is it not? When the safety of the king's own ward," he said the word like it was a disease, "is entrusted to a shunned, mateless female, a woman with no name, no pack, and a fatherless pup in tow." The world stopped. The clinking of silver, the soft music, the quiet conversations, it all ceased. Every eye in the hall was on her. The old shame, the one she fought every single day, rose up like bile in her throat. She could feel her cheeks burning, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to disappear, to run, to hide. But then, she felt a small hand slip into hers under the table. Leo. He looked up at her, his expression not of fear but of confusion. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the venom. And something inside her shifted. The fear didn't vanish. Instead, it crystallized. It hardened into a cold, clear diamond of rage. This wasn't about her anymore. This man, this pig, had just insulted her son. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking with Lord Valerius's. The entire hall held its breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke, her words were quiet, precise, and sharper than any blade. "You are mistaken, my lord," she said, her voice perfectly even. "My son is not fatherless. He simply has a mother strong enough to be both." The tension broke. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept the room. Valerius stared at her, his face purpling with shock and fury. She had not only defied him, she had defeated him.
He had heard every word. His conversation with the Southern Alpha was a pretense. His attention had been fixed on Nadia the entire time. When Valerius spoke, a low, murderous growl rose in his throat. He was about to rise, to strip the title from the pathetic lord and cast him out into the snows, but then she spoke. Her words were not a plea for help. They were a declaration of strength. He watched, stunned, as she single-handedly silenced a man twice her size and 100 times her rank. A fierce, possessive pride surged through him, so potent it nearly buckled his knees. This was his queen. He knew it with a certainty that shook him to his very soul. She was magnificent. He was about to raise his goblet, to toast her and seal Valerius's humiliation, but the great hall doors burst open. A royal herald, breathless and pale, strode to the center of the room. "Your Majesty," he cried, his voice echoing off the high stone ceiling. "A delegation has arrived. They demand an audience." Theron's spine went rigid. A delegation from where? The herald swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously towards Nadia. "From the Black Moon Pack, sire." His voice dropped, heavy with dread. "They are led by Alpha Gideon."
The name hung in the air, a poison cloud choking the life from the room. Gideon. Her breath caught. The hall, moments before a stage for her small victory, instantly became a cage with the wolf at the door. Theron's face was a mask of cold fury, his knuckles white where he gripped his goblet. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, and the herald scurried away. The whispers in the hall died, replaced by a thick, suffocating anticipation. He was here. The architect of her shame, the ghost she could never outrun, was here. What followed was a blur of motion. Guards took their positions, the nobles stiffened, and Theron rose, his presence dominating the entire hall. But Nadia saw none of it. Her world had narrowed to the great oak doors at the end of the room. With every heartbeat, her fear grew, a cold vine wrapping around her lungs. She pulled Leo closer, her body a fragile shield. The doors swung open, and there he was, Gideon. He hadn't aged a day. He was still devastatingly handsome. His dark hair swept back from his brow, his smile as easy and predatory as she remembered. He was flanked by two of his pack's enforcers, but he walked as if he were the one who owned the castle. His eyes scanned the room, dismissing the nobles, dismissing the guards, until they landed on her. The moment their eyes locked, the air crackled. His smile widened. It wasn't a smile of warmth, it was a smile of ownership. A smile that said, "There you are. I've come to collect what's mine." Before she could move, before she could even breathe, he started walking. Not towards the throne, towards her. The entire court watched, breathless as he closed the distance, his steps sure and steady. He stopped before their table, his gaze dropping to Leo, who hid his face in Nadia's side. "Nadia," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that was meant for her ears but pitched for the entire room to hear. "It's been too long." He looked at Leo, his expression softening into a mask of paternal warmth that made her stomach turn. "And this must be our son." Our son. The words were a brand, a public claim. This wasn't an attack, it was an invasion, and it was just the beginning.
A low growl rumbled in his chest, a feral sound of pure, possessive rage. He watched Gideon approach Nadia's table, and it took every ounce of his kingly control not to descend the dais and rip the man's throat out. This was a calculated move, a power play enacted on his floor in front of his court. Gideon wasn't just here for Nadia, he was here to challenge him. The man was a viper, cloaking his venom in a disarmingly handsome package. His words were slick, designed to sound reasonable, paternal. Our son. He laid a claim as if it were his right, painting Nadia not as a woman who had been discarded, but as one who had simply strayed. Still, Theron held his ground. Because of that, he knew this was a political chessboard, and the first to lose his temper would be the first to lose the game. His goal was to see Gideon's true strategy. He had to let the man make his move. What followed was a tense standoff. Gideon ignored him completely, focusing all his attention on Nadia. It was a deliberate, insulting dismissal of Theron's authority. He was treating the king of all wolves as an obstacle, a temporary inconvenience in his path. Finally, Gideon turned, his dark eyes meeting Theron's with a flicker of arrogant challenge. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Forgive my forwardness. I have come a long way. A father's heart, you understand." The lie was so blatant, so perfectly delivered, it was almost admirable. "Your purpose here is yet unclear, Alpha Gideon," Theron said, his own voice dangerously calm, each word laced with ice. "State it." Gideon's smile never wavered. He gestured to Nadia and Leo. "I have come to bring my family home." The audacity of it sent a fresh wave of fury through Theron. But he saw the trap. Gideon was framing this as a domestic affair, a simple pack matter. He was betting that Theron, as king, would be bound by tradition to respect the sanctity of a pack's internal business, especially the bond between a sire and his heir. More importantly, he was doing it publicly, forcing Theron's hand in front of allies and enemies alike. To deny him without cause would be seen as tyranny. To acquiesce would be to hand Nadia and her son over to the monster who broke her. In that moment, he realized the ambush in the forest had just been the opening salvo. This was the true beginning of the war, and its battlefield was not a muddy track in the woods, but the heart of his very own court.
The next day, she was summoned to the throne room for the formal audience. The room was packed, alphas from visiting packs, members of the king's own council, and a gallery of whispering nobles. It was a trial. Her trial. Her goal was to remain composed, to show no weakness. But her hands were slick with sweat, and her heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. Gideon stood before the throne, looking regal and righteous, a concerned alpha come to claim his own. He spun a masterful tale of a tragic misunderstanding, of a young, foolish alpha who had made a terrible mistake and had spent years searching for the woman he had wronged. He was painting himself as the victim, and her as the runaway. "The boy, our son, Leo, needs his sire," Gideon declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "He needs his pack, his heritage. Ancient law is clear on this matter. The heir of an alpha belongs with his father's people." He then turned, his gaze finding her in the crowd, and his expression was one of deep, feigned regret. "And his mother belongs with her mate." The air thickened. He wasn't just claiming Leo, he was claiming her. He was trying to reinstate the bond he himself had shattered. She felt the world tilt, the faces in the crowd blurring. This was her nightmare come to life. To be shackled to him again, to be dragged back to the pack that had celebrated her humiliation, it was a fate worse than death. She looked to Theron, seated on his massive stone throne, her eyes pleading. "Do something. Please." Theron's face was unreadable, a mask of stone. He listened, his gaze never leaving Gideon's.
He was trapped. A king in a cage of his own laws. As Gideon spoke, Theron saw the full, diabolical brilliance of his plan. He wasn't using force. He was using the one thing Theron was sworn to uphold: tradition. The law was clear. A sire had a primary claim to his offspring, especially an alpha sire to a male heir. To deny this claim outright, without a compelling legal reason, would be an act of tyranny. It would give the factions allied with Gideon the very excuse they needed to declare him an unjust king. His mind raced, searching for a loophole, a counter-move. But Gideon had played his hand perfectly. The conflict was no longer about an ambush or treason. He had reframed it as a simple, powerful story, a father wanting his son. How could a king deny that? He saw the raw terror in Nadia's eyes, the desperate plea, and it felt like a dagger in his gut, because for the first time in his reign, he felt powerless. He was the most powerful wolf in the land, yet he was bound by the very chains of his own authority. He could execute a traitor, but he couldn't easily stop a father. He had to buy time. That was his only option. He rose, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "The claim of a sire is a sacred one," he began, watching Gideon's smug expression. "But so is the well-being of a child under the protection of the crown." He let his gaze sweep the room. "This is a matter of great weight. I will consider your claim, Alpha Gideon. A verdict will be rendered in due time." It was a stall, a temporary reprieve, and everyone in the room knew it. Gideon bowed, his smile triumphant. He had won the first battle. He had cornered the king. As the court began to disperse, Theron's gaze met Nadia's. He saw not relief in her eyes, but a new, chilling emotion. Betrayal.
That night, she stormed into his private study, her terror finally boiling over into a white-hot rage. The carefully constructed walls of her composure had crumbled. He stood by the fire, staring into the flames, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "You did nothing," she accused, her voice shaking. "You just stood there and let him lay claim to my son, to me. Is your protection just words?" He turned slowly, and the look on his face wasn't one of kingly authority, but of a weary, haunted man. "It is not that simple, Nadia." "Isn't it?" she shot back, taking a step closer. "You are the king. Your word is law. Make a law. Tell him no. Why won't you just stop him?" "Because he is using the law against me," he roared, his voice cracking like a whip. He slammed his glass down, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "Because if I am seen as a king who ignores our most sacred traditions for a woman, it will give my enemies the leverage they need to start a civil war." His words hit her, but they didn't soothe her. "So, you'll sacrifice us? You'll hand my son over to that monster to keep your throne?" The pain on his face was so raw, so profound, it stole her breath. He took a step towards her, his voice dropping to a raw, ragged whisper. "You think this is about my throne?" He let out a harsh, broken laugh. "This throne is a curse." Without warning, his composure broke. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a grief so deep it seemed bottomless. "Years ago," he began, his voice barely audible, "I had a mate, my fated. She was with child. My enemies, the same vipers who now whisper with Gideon, saw her as my weakness. They arranged an accident, a carriage, much like the one you found me in." Her chest ached. She saw the truth of it, the story of the lonely, grieving king she'd sensed from the very beginning. "I was not with her. I was attending to my duties," he said, the word dripping with self-loathing. "I chose politics over my family, and they died. I learned then that the law is a weapon, and my enemies will use any weakness, any perceived favoritism to strike at what I hold dear." He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw not a king, but a man terrified of history repeating itself. "I am not being cautious to save my crown, Nadia," he whispered, the space between them burning. "I am being cautious to save you." In that moment, everything changed. The anger, the fear, it all melted away, replaced by a wave of stunning, heartbreaking empathy. He wasn't a distant, powerful king. He was a man just as broken as she was, trying to protect the last embers of light in his world. Before the words left her lips, she knew. They were no longer just a king and his ward. They were allies. They were survivors. And their war had just begun.
The moment the truth left his lips, something cracked between them. The wall of grief he had built around his heart, stone by painful stone, now had a fissure in it. And through that crack, her empathy flowed like warm, healing light. He saw it in her eyes. Not pity, but a profound, soul-deep understanding. She saw the man, not the crown. Because of that, his path became clear. Caution had failed him once before. It would not fail him again. He would no longer hide behind the law. He would wield it. The next day he called an emergency session of the court. He had Nadia stand beside him, not behind him, a silent, unshakable statement of unity. Her hand was in his, small and trembling, but her back was straight, her chin high. She was terrified, but she was here. She was fighting. Gideon stood in the assembly, a smug, confident smirk on his face. He believed he had the king cornered. He believed this was his victory lap. He was wrong. Alpha Gideon has invoked ancient law to claim his sire right, Theron began, his voice a low, resonant boom that filled the throne room. The hall was deathly silent. And the law is sacred. A child's heritage is sacred. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching Gideon's smirk widen. "But there is a higher law," Theron continued, his voice dropping, taking on an edge of pure, unadulterated steel. "The law of the crown, the sacred duty of the king to protect the weak and the vulnerable within his realm." He then raised their joined hands. "Nadia of Whisperwood Edge saved my life. Her son Leo is a boy of courage and spirit. They are refugees of a cruel and unjust pack politics, and they came to my citadel seeking sanctuary." He let his gaze sweep over every alpha, every noble. "And sanctuary they have found." Without another word, he declared, "By royal decree, I, King Theron, do hereby claim the boy Leo as a ward of the crown. He is under my direct and absolute protection. His well-being, his future, and his residency are now matters of the throne, and the throne alone. Any pack claim is hereby superseded." The collective gasp of the court was like a gust of wind. It was a move of breathtaking audacity. It didn't break the law. It sidestepped it entirely, using the king's ultimate authority. Gideon's face. Oh, it was a masterpiece. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, murderous rage. He had been outmaneuvered, his perfect legal trap dismantled in a single public declaration. His eyes locked with Theron's, and in them Theron saw a promise of a new kind of war, one that would not be fought with laws, but with blood. And Theron was ready for it.
She stood by his side, her legs threatening to give out, but his hand was a warm, solid anchor in the storm. The king's words washed over her, a shield of power she'd never dreamed of possessing. Ward of the crown. He had built a fortress around her son with his words alone. In that moment, watching Gideon's handsome face twist into a mask of fury, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But that hope was a fragile, newborn thing. That night, the citadel, which had begun to feel like a strange sort of sanctuary, felt like a battlefield once more. The whispers followed her again, but now they were different. Not just contempt, but fear. She was the woman the king had defied tradition for. She was a symbol, a target. She was putting Leo to bed when a royal servant brought her a small lacquered box. "A delivery for you, my lady." Her blood ran cold. It wasn't from the king. She knew that instantly. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were things she hadn't seen in 5 years. A single pressed moon petal, the flower he'd given her on their first meeting. A small carved wooden wolf, a twin to the one Leo clutched in his sleep, and a faded ribbon she had worn to the ceremony, the one he'd untied from her hair just before he shattered her world. Her breath caught, a strangled, painful sound. This wasn't a gift. It was a message. It was a weapon. Gideon was reminding her of who she used to be, the hopeful, naive woman who had believed his lies. He was telling her, without words, "You do not belong here with a king. You belong to me. Remember your place." The old shame, the familiar voice whispering you are damaged, you are worthless, coiled in her stomach. The box was a poison, and it was working.
He found her in her chambers, staring at the open box as if it contained a nest of vipers. Her face was ashen, the newfound strength he'd seen in her eyes completely gone, replaced by the haunted look of a ghost. "Nadia?" he asked softly. She flinched, slamming the lid shut. "It's nothing." But he saw the single faded ribbon that had fallen to the floor. Without asking, he strode over and opened the box. His wolf rose, a silent, snarling beast, as he took in the contents. This was a psychological attack, a violation, cruel and deeply personal. "He is trying to remind you of the cage he put you in," Theron said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And he's right," she whispered, her voice trembling, broken. I'm not a queen, Theron. I'm just the woman he threw away." The raw pain in her voice was a physical blow. In that moment, he saw the true depth of her wound. Gideon hadn't just rejected her. He had poisoned her very soul, making her believe she was worthless. His goal became singular and absolute: burn the poison out. He took the box from her unresisting hands. With a single glance, he commanded her, "Come with me." He led her to his private study, to the massive stone hearth where a fire roared against the night's chill. He didn't say a word. He simply opened the box and one by one dropped the items into the flames. The ribbon curled, turning to black ash. The wooden wolf was consumed by orange and blue light. The moon petal vanished in a puff of white smoke. He then tossed the box itself in. They watched it burn, the lacquered wood blistering and cracking, until it was nothing. When it was done, he turned to her. The air thickened, the space between them burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the fire. "That woman is gone," he said, his voice low and fierce. He gently touched her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "She burned with that box. The woman who stands before me is the one who saved a king, the one who defied a noble, the one who stands beside me in a throne room and does not flinch." His golden eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw not a king, but a man. Her man. "He did not throw you away, Nadia," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart ache. "He lost you." As the fire bloomed beneath her skin, she knew with a terrifying certainty that she was falling for him. And in a world of war and politics, that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. The next day, his victory felt hollow. He had won the legal battle and he had soothed Nadia's immediate pain, but he knew Gideon was not a wolf who simply accepted defeat. He was a serpent who would retreat into the shadows only to strike again. He was in a council meeting with Kale and his top spy masters, the mood grim. "He's still in the capital," Kale reported, his finger tracing a line on the map. "He hasn't returned to his own territory. He's meeting with people, quietly." "Who?" Theron demanded. The spy master hesitated. "Lord Valerius, for one, and several of the southern alphas who believe your alliance with the Lady Nadia has made you act erratically." He chose his words carefully. Theron's blood ran cold. This was it, the move he had feared. Gideon was no longer just fighting for a son. He was building a coalition. He was gathering the disgruntled, the ambitious, and the treacherous. He was turning this into a referendum on Theron's fitness to rule. "He is planting a seed," Theron murmured, more to himself than to the others. "The seed of sedition." "What's worse, my king," the spy master added, his voice low, "is that our sources say he has a powerful ally, someone high up, someone inside the citadel itself. A traitor, a serpent in his own den, whispering in Gideon's ear, feeding him information." The room fell silent. The weight of the crown suddenly felt heavier than ever. He had publicly declared his protection of Nadia and Leo, drawing a line in the sand. He had taken a stand, a point of no return, and now, his enemies were gathering on the other side of that line. They were no longer just attacking the outcast woman he had taken in. They were coming for his throne, and they were using his heart as the justification for the war. The echo of his past, the memory of his lost mate, screamed a warning in his mind. A king who loves is a king with a target on his back. And he had just painted the biggest one imaginable.
For the first time in a long, long time, she felt a flicker of real peace. A week had passed since Theron had burned her past to ash. A week since he had declared her son a ward of the crown. And in that week, a fragile routine had begun to form. Mornings were spent with Leo in the Citadel's sprawling, sun-drenched gardens. He would chase butterflies while she sat on a stone bench, the whispers of the court seeming distant and faint out here. Theron would often join them, not as a king but as a man, his presence a warm, solid wall at her back. He was teaching Leo how to skip stones across a small, clear pond. His deep laughter mingled with her son's high-pitched giggles, and the sound was a balm on her scarred soul. In this moment, under the warm sun, they weren't a king, an outcast, and a fatherless boy. They were a family. Maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. Her goal was so simple, so painfully mundane. She just wanted this peace, this laughter. A trusted servant, a kind-faced older woman named Alara, approached them with a tray of lemonade and sweet cakes. "A treat for the little lord," she said, her smile warm. Leo cheered and ran over. "I'll watch him, my lady," Alara offered. "You enjoy the sun." Nadia hesitated for only a second. She trusted Alara. She had been nothing but kind. So she nodded, leaning her head back and closing her eyes, just for a moment, letting the warmth soak into her bones. What followed was the worst mistake of her life. The scream wasn't loud. It was a choked, terrified cry that was swallowed by the high garden walls. Her eyes snapped open. The bench where Alara and Leo had been sitting was empty. The tray of lemonade was overturned on the grass. "Leo," she called, a thread of panic tightening in her chest. Silence. "Leo!" Terror, cold and sharp, stole her breath. She scrambled to her feet, Theron instantly by her side, his face a mask of grim concern. They split up, their frantic calls echoing through the pristine, silent gardens. Her thoughts spun. How? Where could he have gone? The gardens were walled, the only exit guarded. Her instincts surged and she ran for that gate. The guards stood at attention, their faces impassive. "Did you see my son? Did he come this way?" she gasped. "No, my lady," one of them said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "No one has passed." A lie. She felt it in her bones. Before she could move, before she could scream at them, a commotion erupted from the other side of the citadel, from the direction of the armory. Shouts, the clang of steel. Without thinking, she ran towards the noise, Theron right behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a prayer and a curse. They burst into the training courtyard to a horrifying scene. Leo stood frozen in the middle of the yard, his small face streaked with tears. A few feet away, a massive, unsheathed sword lay on the cobblestones, a sword that had clearly just fallen from a high weapon rack. And standing between her son and the fallen blade, his hand outstretched as if he'd just pushed the boy to safety, was Gideon. He was breathing heavily, his face a perfect picture of heroic, shocked relief. "Thank the spirits I was passing by," Gideon said, his voice ringing across the yard for all the gathering guards and servants to hear. He knelt, pulling a terrified Leo into his arms. He could have been killed. His dark, triumphant eyes met hers over her son's head, and in that moment, she knew. This was no accident. It was a perfectly executed trap, and she had walked right into it.
The emergency council meeting was a pit of vipers. He sat on his throne, his hands gripping the stone arm so tightly his knuckles were white. Nadia was not present. He had forbidden it. He would not have them tear her apart with their accusations. But he could feel her terror from across the citadel, a phantom ache in his own chest. His goal was to shut this down, to expose Gideon's obvious, theatrical lie, and reassert his authority. But he had underestimated his enemy's cunning. Gideon wasn't raving or demanding. He was the picture of a concerned father. He spoke of the incident with a heavy, sorrowful heart. He didn't blame Nadia directly. Oh no, he was far too clever for that. "The Lady Nadia is distracted," Gideon said, his voice resonating with false sympathy. "Her mind is burdened. It is no fault of her own. But a child, an inquisitive boy, needs constant supervision. The citadel is a dangerous place." He then looked at the assembled alphas. "I almost lost my son today. Our son. I ask you, as fathers, as alphas, can we allow this risk to continue?" Lord Valerius and the other allied alphas immediately voiced their support. They spoke of Nadia's unsuitability, her fragile state, her common birth. They twisted Theron's protection of her into a reckless infatuation that was endangering a child. They were not attacking him directly. They were attacking the foundation of his recent decrees. He fought back, his voice a low, dangerous rumble of command. "This was a setup. The gate guards have been questioned. And they swear no one passed, Valerius interrupted smoothly. And the serving woman, Ilara, the one entrusted with the boy's care? So distraught by her failure, she threw herself from the western tower not an hour ago. A tragic suicide. The air thickened. Theron felt the trap snap shut. Their key witness, silenced, gone. It was Gideon's word against a dead woman's. The council was swaying. Even those loyal to him were beginning to look uncertain. The safety of a child, an Alpha's heir, was a powerful argument. He was losing control. The Vipers were closing in, and he had no proof, no weapon to fight them with. Finally, a respected elder Alpha, a neutral party, stood to speak. King Theron, your decree stands. The boy is your ward. But the council has a duty to ensure his safety. A compromise must be reached. Theron's chest ached. He knew what was coming. Until this matter can be fully investigated, the elder declared, the boy, Leo, must be removed from his mother's direct care. He will be housed in the royal nursery under the care of vetted neutral guardians appointed by this council for his own protection. It was a devastating blow, wrapped in the language of reason. They were using his own laws, his own counsel, to tear a child from his mother's arms. If he refused, he would be a tyrant. If he accepted, he would break Nadia's heart. As the silence roared, he looked at the smug, victorious expression on Gideon's face. He had no choice. So be it, he said, the words tasting like ash and defeat. He had failed her. He had brought her to his castle, promising her safety, and instead, he had led her into a cage and handed her enemies the key.
When Theron told her, the world simply ended. The words didn't seem real. Removed from your care, for his own safety. It was a lie. A cruel, twisted lie. Her safety, her purpose, her entire world was Leo. They were taking her world away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying numbness washed over her. She just sat on her bed as two stern-faced nursemaids, women she'd never seen before, entered her chambers. Leo didn't understand. He cried for her, his small arms reaching out as they led him away. "Mama! I want my mama!" She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She just watched him go, his cries echoing down the long, cold hall until they faded into silence. And then, there was nothing. The silence was a living thing, a monster. It filled the room, filled her head, filled her soul. In the quiet that followed, Gideon's words from all those years ago came back to her, no longer a memory, but a fresh, bleeding wound. Too old, damaged, unfit. He was right. He had been right all along. She was damaged. Everything she touched, she broke. She had brought this danger upon her own son. She had brought this weakness upon a king. Her presence here was a poison, sickening everything around her. Her thoughts spun. Theron had tried to protect her, but she was beyond protection. Her love wasn't a shield, it was a target. And as long as she was here, her son would be a pawn and the king would be vulnerable. Deep down, she knew the truth. There was only one way to fix this. There was only one way to save them. She had to disappear. She rose from the bed, a ghost in her own skin. She moved to the wardrobe and pulled out a small, simple traveling pack, the one she had brought with her from Whisperwood Edge, from her old life. She placed a spare dress inside, a small pouch of herbs. Her hands moved mechanically, without thought, without feeling. She was not running away in fear this time. She was performing a surgery. She was cutting out the diseased part to save the whole. It was the only act of strength she had left. The door creaked open. Theron stood there, his face a ruin of anguish and self-loathing. He saw the bag in her hands, and whatever hope he had left in his eyes died. Her voice trembled, a fragile, broken thing. "I'm leaving." He just stared at her, the silence stretching between them, heavy and absolute. In the stillness that followed, he finally spoke, his voice raw with a pain that mirrored her own. You would leave me to fight this alone? His question was not a question. It was an anchor. You would leave me to fight this alone? The words hung in the suffocating silence of the room, and in them she heard the echo of his own shattered past. He wasn't talking about Gideon. He wasn't talking about his throne. He was talking about the crushing, absolute loneliness of grief, a loneliness she knew all too well. Her plan to leave, which had seemed so noble, so necessary only moments before, suddenly felt like what it was, a coward's retreat. She had spent years telling herself she was strong enough to be both mother and father to Leo, yet here she was, abandoning the only man who had ever truly stood with her, because she was afraid. I am a danger to you, she whispered, the words tasting like a lie even as she spoke them. To Leo. As long as I am here, he will use me to hurt you both. He took a step closer, the space between them crackling with a raw, desperate energy. Let him try. The words were a low growl, a promise of violence. But then, his voice broke, the sound so full of pain it made her chest ache in sympathy. Do you not understand, Nadia? He has already taken your son from you. I have already failed you. If you walk out that door, then he wins. He will have taken everything from me. As if pulled by a string, her gaze met his. The king was gone. In his place was Theron, a man stripped bare of all his armor, his golden eyes burning with a terrifying vulnerability. When my mate died, he said, his voice raw, I sealed my heart in a tomb of ice. I thought duty, power, that was all that was left. A king cannot afford to feel because love is a weakness his enemies will exploit. He took another step, his scent, pine and winter air, and something that was uniquely him, surrounding her. I was a fool. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. You are not my weakness, Nadia, he whispered, the words a sacred vow. You are the fire that's melted the ice. You and Leo, you are the reason I fight. Leaving is not a sacrifice. It's surrender, and I cannot lose you too. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The lie she had believed for 5 long years, that she was damaged, worthless, a liability, shattered into a million pieces. He didn't see her as a broken thing to be fixed. He saw her as a fire, as his strength. Before the words left her lips, she knew. Her destiny was not to run. It was to stand, to fight. Her hand came up to meet his, her fingers lacing through his. Okay, Theron, she said, her voice no longer trembling, but filled with a new, cold, hard resolve. I will not leave you. We fight. Together.
The moment her fingers laced with his, a current of pure, unadulterated hope surged through him. He had laid his soul bare, offering her the broken pieces of his heart, and instead of turning away, she had taken his hand and offered him her strength in return. They were no longer a king and his ward. They were a pact, a single unified front. Truth be told, a new, ferocious energy now coursed through him. Because of that, his mind, once clouded with despair, became sharp as a shard of obsidian. Good, he rumbled, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. Because I have a plan. He led her to the massive strategy table in his study, the one carved with the map of his kingdom. He looked down at it, but he wasn't seeing territories or borders. He was seeing a chessboard. We have no proof, he stated, the words cold and hard. The council is compromised, the only witness is dead, and Gideon has public opinion on his side. He has played the game of politics perfectly. He then looked at her, a predatory gleam in his eyes. So, we will change the game. How? She asked, her gaze fixed on his, unwavering. We cannot prove his crimes, Theron said, his voice dropping low. So we will make him confess them. We will use his greatest strength, his arrogance, as the weapon that destroys him. He pointed to the calendar on his desk. The coming full moon was circled in red ink. The blood moon ceremony is in 3 days. It is the most sacred night of the year, a night of bonds, of truth, of pack law made manifest before the eyes of the spirits. Every alpha in the region will be here. Nadia's breath hitched as she understood. A public stage. The ultimate public stage, he corrected, a grim smile touching his lips. Gideon believes he has you broken. He believes you are weak, that you are his to command. We will let him believe it. Her eyes widened. You want me to be the bait. The thought of putting her in danger sent a feral growl through his wolf, but he pushed it down. This had to be her choice. He will not touch you. I swear it on my life. But yes, we need him to feel secure, triumphant. We need him to gloat. How will anyone hear him? My spy master has enchanted listening stones. Small, discreet, they can project a whisper across a courtyard. I will have my most loyal royal guard, men who would die for me led by Kale, hidden in plain sight. They will hear every word. He watched her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. To ask this of her, after everything she had endured, it was monstrous, but it was the only way. Instead of fear, he saw a fire ignite in her eyes, a cold, dangerous fire he was coming to adore. What do I have to do? She asked, her voice steady. With a single glance, he knew they would win. You will send him a message. You will tell him you need to speak with him, alone, during the ceremony. Tell him you are reconsidering, that you are afraid, that you need his guidance. He said the word with utter disgust. He will not be able to resist the chance to lord his victory over you. I know his kind. And when he confesses, then he will have condemned himself, not by my word but by his own, on the most sacred night of the year, in front of the entire kingdom. There will be no escape, no politics, just his truth and my justice. She took a deep breath, and then she gave a sharp, determined nod. Let's set the trap.
The quill felt heavy in her hand, a small, dark weapon. Her goal was to write the most believable lie of her life. She had to channel the broken, terrified woman she had been just hours ago. She had to remember the taste of shame, the weight of despair. Her hand trembled as she wrote, Alpha Gideon, I must speak with you. I am confused, afraid. What the king has done, it is not right. He does not understand our ways. My son, I do not know what to do. Please, meet me by the old weirwood tree during the blood moon ceremony. I need your counsel. Nadia. She stared at the note, her stomach churning. It was a perfect piece of bait, crafted from her own pain. She sealed it with plain wax and handed it to a trusted messenger Theron had provided. As the messenger departed, a cold dread washed over her. The die was cast. There was no turning back now. She looked out the window, at the sky darkening towards twilight. In 3 days, under the light of a blood-red moon, her life would either be reclaimed or it would be over.
Meanwhile, in the armory, Theron addressed a small elite cadre of his royal guard. Kyle stood beside him. These were not courtiers or politicians. They were wolves, warriors bound to him by blood oaths and years of shared battle. He could trust them with his life. More importantly, he could trust them with hers. He explained the plan in low, clipped tones. He showed them the listening stones, small gray pebbles that felt warm to the touch. You will be positioned as an honor guard around the ceremonial circle, he commanded, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. You will hear everything. When Gideon confesses, you will not act, not until I give the signal. Is that understood? A chorus of, Yes, Your Majesty, answered him. Kael, he said, turning to his general, you will be with me. If he so much as lays a hand on her, all plans are off. We take him then and there. Kael nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. It will be done, my king. That night, as the citadel slept, a spy delivered Nadia's note into Gideon's waiting hand. He stood on the balcony of his lavish guest quarters, the lights of the capital spread out below him like a treasure chest he was about to claim. He broke the seal and read the note. A slow, cruel smile spread across his handsome face. He looked up at the waxing moon, a sliver of the power to come. So predictable, he murmured to the night air, crumbling the note in his fist. The broken little doe, running back to the wolf. He had no idea he was the one walking into the snare.
The blood moon bled across the night sky, painting the world in shades of crimson and shadow. It was beautiful and terrifying. Her heart pounded a frantic, wild rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat for the end of the world, or the beginning of one. With every step she took towards the ancient weirwood tree, she felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. She was the bait, walking into the wolf's den, and her only weapon was the lie that she was already broken. Gideon stood waiting for her, a dark silhouette against the moon's gory light. He looked every bit the triumphant alpha, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug, possessive smile playing on his lips. As she drew closer, his scent, cold pine and arrogance, assaulted her, and the old fear, the ghost of the shamed woman she used to be, rose up like a phantom. "You are not her anymore," she told herself, her nails digging into her palms. "You are fire." "Nadia," he purred as she stopped before him. The air thickened, charged with a tension so thick she could taste it. "I knew you'd come to your senses. The king plays at power, but you and I, we are pack. We are truth." Her voice trembled when she spoke, and she didn't have to fake it. "He doesn't understand. He made Leo his ward, but he's put him in danger." Gideon's laughter was a low, cruel sound. Oh, my sweet, naive Nadia. The boy was never in danger from that falling sword. His eyes gleamed with malevolent pride. A clumsy servant, a conveniently unlocked weapon rack. It was all so easy. A perfect little stage play to prove my point. To prove that you are an unfit mother without me. Her breath caught. The confession. So easy. So arrogant. She had to keep him talking. The servant. "Alara," she whispered, her voice laced with manufactured horror. "A loose end," he dismissed with a wave of his hand. She was paid well for her part, but she knew too much. A tragic suicide, they said. To make things worse, she was surprisingly loyal to you. A pity. In the span of a breath, the world seemed to hold its silence. This was it. The final piece. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't you see? I did all of this for us. For our family. Theron is a weak, sentimental fool, ruled by the ghost of his dead mate. His grip on the throne is slipping. And with you and the boy by my side, I will have the leverage I need to take it all." He reached for her, his fingers about to brush her arm. "Now, you will come with me. You will tell the council you made a mistake. You will accept my claim. You belong to me. You always have." Before his fingers could touch her skin, a voice boomed through the clearing, amplified by a power she did not understand, yet it resonated in her very soul. It was Gideon's voice. The boy was never in danger from that falling sword. It was all so easy. And then another part of his confession echoed for all to hear. A loose end. She knew too much. Gideon froze, his face a mask of pure, dawning horror. His head snapped towards the ceremonial circle, where hundreds of wolves stood in stunned silence, their faces illuminated by the bloody moonlight. And then, Theron's voice, cold as the grave, echoed through the enchanted stones. "Treason," the king declared, "and murder, confessed on sacred ground, under the blood moon. There is nowhere left for you to run, serpent." Without warning, Gideon lunged, not for the shadows, but for her. A snarl ripped from his throat, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. If he was going down, he would take her with him, but he never reached her. A blur of black and silver intercepted him. Theron. He moved with a speed that was not human, his power a physical force that slammed into Gideon, sending him sprawling to the ground. The royal guard, Kale at their head, formed a perfect, silent circle, their swords drawn. Gideon scrambled to his feet, his wolf surging forward, but he was no match for a furious king. Theron didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He met Gideon's charge, and the fight was over before it began. A brutal, efficient display of power that left Gideon broken and gasping at Theron's feet. Theron looked down at the pathetic man, his expression not of rage, but of cold, absolute justice. "Death is too merciful for you," he growled. "You will be stripped of your name, your rank, and your pack. You will be an exile, a ghost. You will have nothing, and you will be no one. That is my judgment." As the guards dragged a screaming, defeated Gideon away, Theron turned to her. He walked through the parting crowd of alphas, his eyes never leaving hers. The entire world was watching, but in that moment, there was only him. He stopped before her, the crimson moonlight painting his face in harsh, beautiful lines. He did not speak. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, knelt before her. A king kneeling to an outcast. He tilted his head, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion so powerful it made her knees weak. And then, he leaned forward. As if fate demanded it, he claimed her. His teeth grazed the side of her neck, a sharp electric shock that was not pain, but pure, possessive bliss. He bit down, not hard, but with a finality that sealed her to him for eternity. The mark tingled, a swirl of heat and magic that healed the old invisible scar of her rejection. As he pulled back, he rose, his hands framing her face. He looked into her eyes, and before the entire world, he whispered the words that remade her soul. "You were never too old." His voice was a raw, broken whisper. "You were never too damaged." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You were always mine."
In the quiet that followed the roar of the crowd, the whispers of the alphas, the entire world faded to a dull hum. Nothing mattered but the woman in his arms. He had marked her, claimed her, branded her soul with his own. And in doing so, he had finally, truly, healed himself. But there was one last piece missing. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a perfect fit. "Come," he murmured, his voice still thick with emotion. "Let's go get our son." He led her away from the stunned court, away from the scene of their victory, through the cold stone corridors of the citadel. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every answer was in their touch, in the steady, rhythmic beat of their hearts. They reached the royal nursery. The two nursemaids, their faces pale with the news that had surely already swept the castle, bowed low and scurried away. The room was quiet, lit by a single soft lamp. Leo was sitting up in his bed, his small face tear-streaked, clutching the small wooden wolf Theron had carved for him. When her name left his lips, it was a tiny, hopeful whisper. "Mama." Nadia broke from his grasp and ran to the bed, sweeping the boy into her arms. She buried her face in his hair, her shoulders shaking with silent, relieved sobs. Leo clung to her, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck, his own quiet sniffles echoing in the still room. Theron stood in the doorway. His heart, which had been a cold, dead stone in his chest for years, ached with a feeling so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. Joy. Pure, fierce, unadulterated joy. This was it. This was everything. Not the crown, not the power, not the victory. This quiet, beautiful moment. A mother and her son reunited, a family made whole. He had spent years ruling a kingdom of stone and shadows. But by fighting for her, he had finally brought the son inside. He watched them, his queen and his son, and knew with a certainty that settled into his very bones that he was finally, truly, home.
Weeks later, the sun felt different, warmer. She stood on the high balcony of the royal suite, a gentle breeze teasing a loose strand of her hair. The citadel no longer felt like a tomb or a cage. It felt like home. Below, in the gardens where she had once felt so much terror, Leo's laughter echoed as he chased Kale's massive wolfhound, a gift from the general himself. Her world tilted, not with fear, but with a quiet, profound contentment. She wore a simple gown of deep forest green, the color of her old life, but it was made of the finest silk. She was not the outcast from Whisperwood Edge, nor was she a bejeweled doll of the court. She was simply Nadia, and for the first time, that felt like enough. It felt like everything. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back, her head resting against Theron's solid chest. He didn't speak, just held her, his chin resting on her head. They watched their son play, a comfortable, perfect silence stretching between them. Something inside her shifted. The last of the old wounds, the last of the phantom aches, finally faded into nothing. She was not the woman who had been rejected. She was the woman who had been chosen, who had been fought for, who had been loved. As if he could read her thoughts, he tightened his hold, his voice a low, warm rumble against her ear. "Happy, my queen?" She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She looked up into his golden eyes, eyes that had once been so full of grief, but now held a galaxy of warmth and love, all for her. Her soul answered without a single word. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and as the sun warmed their faces and their son's laughter filled the air, she knew, with a peace that settled into the very marrow of her bones, that this was not a fairy tale ending. It was just the beginning.